He doesn't know he's a Washitaw, but he lives in Washitaw. We will hear from Mr. Frank Joseph, the magazine that I've been actually peddling to you without authority. He is the editor of the Ancient America magazine, all the way from Wisconsin to visit with you. And I would like to tell him, Brother Jamal in Detroit, I'm a minister of information. I can't see you, but he probably can. Also, it's peddling at the embassy. Miss Oma is here at Cultural Center, and I just call her Oma Bay. She has a natural right because she has a business to sell magazines. And we're going to ask all the other people that has businesses to sell magazines, and I'm not supposed to say this because he could stop me from saying it. But since it's about our culture, I'm telling you to sell them. Buy them and give them away. Mr. Frank Joseph. Give him a hand.
The Empress certainly has our authority and best wishes for representing the magazine. I can't think of a better representative for the Ancient America than the Empress. I want to bring the Empress greetings from the thousands of our readers across the United States and around the world, and also greetings to you here. I am Frank Joseph. I'm the editor of the Ancient American magazine. And for those of you that are not aware of it, Ancient American is more than a magazine. It's a kind of an organization. It's a multiracial organization of people around the world to show that there were great cultures, great civilizations, and great peoples in America hundreds and thousands of years before Columbus was even born. And so, what I basically want to do, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to get into the slides pretty soon, but I did want to share with you the oldest story in America. It's very brief. And this is the story that is repeated by virtually every Native American tribe across the United States. As far as I know, everyone. And it is the story of their origins. They tell their stories that long ago, on an island in the middle of the Sunrise Sea, which we call the Atlantic Ocean, there was a beautiful island. And on this island were very virtuous people. They were the very first people. And they created a beautiful lodge, as the Indians referred to it. And the gods at that time, the top god mostly is referred to as Wesahisa, the creator god. And Wesahisa nourished this people, and they loved him. But over time, these people became arrogant and too self-satisfied. They figured that they were God's chosen people and that they figured they didn't have anything more to do with them. They were good enough on their own. So they became sinful, and they became greedy. And God said, I'm going to punish these people. And he sent a great fire from heaven. And this fire came from heaven and lighted upon this lodge. The fire was so great that the other gods prevailed upon Wesahisa to prevent the earth from burning, to create a great flood. And this flood came and enveloped this lodge that was on fire. This is what the Native Americans tell us. Now, there were virtuous people still. Not all the people were evil. And these people prayed to God, and they said, please save us from this destruction. And so he conjured a great turtle to come up from the bottom of the sea. And the refugees of this great destruction swam out onto the back of the turtle, so the Native Americans tell us. And as this island on fire sank into the sea, the turtle swam across the ocean and landed on these shores. And that is why every Native American tribe refers to America as Turtle Island, because of this legend. Now, is it only just a story? Well, consider this. On the other side of the world, there was a great Greek philosopher, the most famous of them all. His name was Plato.
Me too.
And the central idea of his philosophy was to tell the truth. The truth was the most important thing of any ideology.
Oh yes.
That's right.
Oh yes.
And he told a story of a place called Atlantis. And he said that on this island, way in the middle of the sea, there was a great virtuous people.
Big.
But they extended their empire around the world, and they became a multiracial state. And they were happy, glorious, prosperous people.
Yes.
But over time, they also became materialistic and greedy. And the god known to the Greeks was Zeus. And Zeus sent a great fiery destruction upon this island.
See?
And the consequences of this destruction was a great flood. And
Yes.
from this flood, the survivors went to many parts of the world. Now here we have Plato, living 400 years before Christ, telling a story which is essentially the same as all of the American Indians are telling us to this day. Now, how does that relate to what I'm going to show you here, and why this place, and why what you are doing? Sum it up in one name, that is Poverty Point. Poverty Point to you is a very special place.
All right.
And it is special maybe for more reasons than a lot of us understand. The destruction for this land known as Atlantis. Now this story that I've given you, some people take as just a moral, just a story. And it does have a moral implication. Others believe that there is a historical truth behind these stories. So you have a combination of true history and a great moral. That a people can become great, but if they overdo it, if they become too selfish, they lose it. And civilization is forgotten and lost for all time.
Amen.
Now, Plato described Atlantis as a very unusual place. He said that it was made up of rings of land and water, alternating rings of land and water.
Yes.
And that these interlinking rings were connected by canals and walkways. And at the very center of Atlantis was the Holy of Holies, sacred temple of the sun. Archaeologists have, and anthropologists, and scholars of all kinds, have studied Plato's account. And they have concluded that the time period that he's talking about is about 1,200 years before Christ. This is when this great destruction of Atlantis was supposed to take place. 1,200 years before Christ.
Right.
Of course, Atlantis was much older than that, but that is the year that it was destroyed. Now we come to a place right here, Louisiana, called Poverty Point. And what do we find? We find the oldest city, known city in North America. And what does it look like? It's a very unusual place. It is made up of concentric rings. Now, when archaeologists first found Poverty Point, they found it from the air because it's so huge. Between 20 and maybe 50,000 people that long ago lived in this great metropolis. Now, when they found it from the air, it looked like an octagon, like half of it. But since then, it's been learned that it was a complete ringed settlement. You had alternating rings of land and water. Not only that, in Poverty Point, you have the exact same sacred numerals that Plato discussed. He said, in Atlantis, the people of Atlantis worshipped the numbers, revered sacred numbers 5 and 6, because 5 represented the male principle, 6 represented the female principle. And that by being in harmony with male and female, you're in harmony with the entire cosmos. You go to Poverty Point, you see the same numbers, 5 and 6 repeated. Not only that, these concentric rings are bisected by canals. Archaeologists now know that these rings were separated by courses of water, exactly the same. But now, here is, I think, the real kicker for that. Poverty Point was made about 1500 BC. That's sure, about 1,500 years before Christ. However, the way we know it today, when it was a huge settlement at its maximum, when it was really built up, is the year 1,200 years before Christ. That's the same time period for the destruction of Atlantis. So it is possible, inferring from all this information, there's a lot more to it that I don't have time to discuss with you, is that when Atlantis, or this great multiracial civilization, was destroyed, some of those people sailed here and they made a recreation of their beloved lost land right here. So we are seeing a very ancient connection with this great flourishing civilization. And why is that important? Is it interesting only historically? No. It's because Atlantis, from what we are told by Plato and other sources, is that here was a truly successful society. It was a free society.
Yes.
People got along in wonderful harmony because they understood that harmony was the basis of the entire universe. But something happened in their society. They became greedy, and they began to separate amongst themselves. And as a consequence, that society collapsed. So we see here happening now, it's like recreated in our time, both Atlantis in its good and its bad days. Certainly you're seeing this recreation now of this idea you've got of a new nation state, of harmony. But at the same time, we're surrounded by this old America, this old United States, this obsolete United States, because it's in decline, and you're trying to make something that's going again. So that is the great lesson, I feel, this year. Well, I've blabbered on long enough. I'm going to show you the slides. No, that's all I really wanted to say with you. I don't want to overload your minds with that. I'm going to show you the slides. I think it best be hitting the light. Yeah. Now, this represents just the gift of the past, as it were. This is the spirit of the past, bringing us back our lost knowledge, really. And history is so important because if you don't have a grounding in the past, you don't know who you are. And if you don't know who you are, you can't go forward into the future. So you can't separate these three. People that live only in the future are lost. They can't function properly in the present. People that are obsessed only with the past, they're lost in a previous time. So you have to have all three. Grounded in our past, and you have to be confident in what you're doing today so you can move in the future. I'm sorry, going the wrong way here. Now, when the first white settlers came to this country, they found these magnificent, beautiful monuments. They had no idea who built these. Now, the Indians that were living there at that time, they had no knowledge of it either. They had forgotten also. They said some foreign people came here and built this. Now this is a place called Mound City. This is in southern Ohio. And they found these magnificent complexes. Who built these things? Why were they built? They didn't know. Some foreign people. Then, as science progressed, they found that some of these mounds were oriented. I have to put my other pair of eyes on because great invention here. They found that some of these mounds were precisely oriented to sophisticated astronomical phenomena, such as this mound here in St. Paul, just outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. This mound is so precisely oriented, the crest of it, so that the sun will appear at this moment only one day of the year, and that is the first day of winter. Now that means that until that time, the days are getting shorter, 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 but after this moment, the days got longer again. So here's a machine that was made over 2,000 years ago, still functioning. Who built this? These mounds are all across the United States. This is a recreation of a fabulous city outside of St. Louis, Missouri. This is called Cahokia. And whoever was here, they were between 30 and 50,000 people, built an enormous wall of something, if you can believe this, 500,000 separate holes went into the creation of this wall. This area in the background is known as Woodhenge. It is a sophisticated astronomical computer. Now this great city dates back about 900 AD. The Indians who live in the area, and I know because I went to school in this area, they are the Mohawk. The Mohawks say, this is not ours. I said some other people came and built this place. This is what Monk's Mound in Cahokia looks like today, to give you some idea of the scale, the huge scale of this. The base of this Monk's Mound is 14 square miles. 14 square acres. And that is larger than the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Now, the mound has basically held its shape over 1,000 years because it is superbly made. Originally, it was completely encased in blue clay. and had yellow geometric designs, spirals and so on. That's all been stripped off since then. On the top, it had a temple, so that the entire compound was over 100 feet high. Here is the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. Can only be seen properly from the air. And it is 1,200 feet long. It has a spiral superbly made, and its mouth is disgorging an egg out of its mouth. Now, this is an ancient symbol for regeneration or rebirth, which is found around the world. In ancient Greece, they had the concept of the caduceus, which is of a serpent again, twined around a staff with an egg coming out of its mouth. Now, the serpent mound, I'll go back to this. By the way, please feel free to interrupt me at any time with questions. The Great Serpent Mound was dated, interestingly enough, to 1,200 BC. That's the same time period as the mounds were being made in Louisiana, and it's the same period for the destruction of Atlantis. However, there is new controversy now that it is not that old. So there still has to be a lot of work to be done. I believe that it is probably about 1200 BC for other reasons, such as it is built on top of a rise. And this rise was created, or struck the Ohio Valley. It created this great uplift. So that was part of this period of worldwide catastrophe of which Atlantis and Louisiana's Poverty Point are related. Sorry, going through. This is part of a great stone wall in southern Illinois. The reason I'm running these things past you is because these are the things that the pioneers saw when they came in and they figured, what is this left over from? What ancient people were here building these great things? This is part of a huge stone complex underwater, 55 miles off the coast of Miami Beach, Florida, off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas. These massive stones are about 20 feet underwater. Who built this? What did this belong to? How did they get underwater? This is a sketch of that structure, of all the known stones, showing how it is done in a very geometrical, very orderly fashion.
Wasn't that Atlantis?
No. Bimini, these structures appear to be part of the Atlantean civilization. Atlantis is not in the Bahamas. However, this appears to have been an outpost which suffered some of that destruction which took place throughout the Atlantic. This is an unusual stone carving. I'll show you how large it is. This was found on the Chicago River on Michigan Avenue. It's called the Wabansie stone. It is hollow at the top, so that, and has a small channel so that water will run out the mouth and down here. The Indians in that area, the Illinois Indians, laid no claim to it whatsoever, did not know who built it. It belonged to a previous period. Notice there's a kind of a beard and rather un-Indian facial features.
So
There gives you an idea of the size.
It's got what they call a Negroid facial features.
Some people have claimed it has negroidal features. However, you'll see some others which are beyond question. Now this, interestingly enough, is made out of solid granite. It's extremely beautifully carved, and it is presently housed at the Chicago Historical Society.
date on it?
Pardon me?
Date?
I have no idea how old this is. However, it had a companion piece, just as beautifully carved, 100 feet further down the Chicago River. Now, when the city was being made, this one was found and preserved. However, the other one was thrown into the river, pushed into the river. Now, interestingly enough, it's possible that this was a mooring stone for a very large ship, because you could conceivably pass a hawser through these holes. There are holes here, and one goes to the top. Or it may have been a fountain. It's made of solid granite. Pardon me? No, you cannot carbon date granite. You can carbon date, well, you can't carbon, you can determine how old the stone is, but you cannot determine how old the carving is. So the boulder could be many millions of years old, but
For that purpose, they chose for that reason.
I have no idea, sir. I don't know. I believe that this was either a fountain of some kind or a mooring stone, or it might have even been a stone of sacrifice.
You're saying a mooring stone. That's where they got the word from, mooring and moor. Moor, M-U-U-R-M-O-O-R.
Of course, those are all seafaring terms. So
Seafaring people.
the Moors might have been a seafaring people related to that term.
Right.
Okay, now, this you're familiar with. This is the Great Pyramid in Chichen Itza in Yucatan. It's known as the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, or the Temple of the Feathered Serpent. The Feathered Serpent was supposed to have been this great man who came across the sea with all of the tablets of civilization. Now, here's Egypt. And we have this great step pyramid on the other side of the world in Saqqara. Look at the resemblances here. They're kind of hard to escape. Then we have a step pyramid in Peru. This is in coastal Peru, about 200 miles north of Lima. Then we have another step pyramid. This is a model in the Chicago Oriental Institute Museum in Chicago. And this is a model of a step pyramid in Babylon. So here you have, around the world, these ancient buildings, essentially the same, also had a ramp going up the front, just the same as the one in Mexico. So there's like a common people, common culture going on.
Yeah.
Here is a model of a sacred pyramid. This is from Cusco, Peru. I visited there 2 years ago, and they have also stories. Native peoples there have stories of this sunken land that their ancestors came from. And the reason it's painted red is because it relates to the name of it. They called it the Old Red Land. Yes?
The ramps that you find, they usually went in a particular direction, like towards the east or anything like that.
These, with the pyramids are almost everywhere in Egypt, America, are all oriented to on like a north, south, east, west basis. It's like they're trying to define the center of cardinal directions. So there's very strong orientations due north and south.
The ramp in particular.
Oh, the ramp? The ramp for this one goes from south to north. That's the one in Babylon. Whatever ramp was here, of course, has been washed away by time. This ramp goes from south to north also. We're looking from the south towards the structure. This is the one in Yucatan now. So here you have, now I'm not saying that all these structures were built by the same people, but it does appear that some genius people traveled around the world and shared their knowledge with the local native people, and then they created basically these similar designs.
Right.
Now this is in Egypt. This is a recreation of another step pyramid. Now, we find this peculiar figure also around the world. This is an aerial photograph of a figure which is 180 feet long. This is in Peru on the side of a mountain. This photograph I took in 1991 when we flew over it. And it represents a figure pointing up in one direction and pointing down the other. Then we find these same figures drawn. This one is from a cave in New Mexico. This one is from a cave in France. This one is from a cave in Italy.
All right.
So we have the same thing. And basically these figures around the world are telling us the idea of their religion, as above, so below.
That's it.
Now, when this figure was found in 1922, this was found in when they were building the subway in Mexico City, and they excavated it and they found that it's pre-Aztec. In other words, it goes back at least 1,000 years ago, probably much further back than that. The facial features were said to be African. The established archaeologists said, no, they're just all Indians. They look like this too. They're just Indians. But then a German archaeologist by the name of von Grutenau said, no, this belongs definitely to a face from Africa. And he traced it to Senegal. The beard is the same as used by the chiefs in Senegal. So, and the position was even of a chief in Senegal. So here we have representation of African influences working in Mexico before the Aztecs.
You are
Von Brutenau passed away about 15 years ago.
in the day's paper, and you see the same mouth.
Right there, that's right.
But what's interesting,
It's the same nose.
now, what's interesting is that the archaeologist said, well, it might be a black, but it shows that the black is in a servile position. But until that he's a slave or something, until Von Brutenau, the same German archaeologist, identified these glyphs on either side, which read Supreme King. So I would say it was not a.
Yeah.
Big today. Yay.
This is
Telescope.
This is an obsidian, a beautifully made obsidian ware. This is also pre-Aztec. It belongs to the Zapotec people. This is in the Valley of Mexico. This is luckily it's in perfect condition. This is now housed at the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City. Represents a black person holding a bowl over his head. Now, when this was first found, they said, well, this also represents, this was probably made in the colonial period and shows a black slave.
Right.
When, however, it was taken, the area that was taken from was examined, it was found that this figure goes back with the carbon dated material between 1800 and 2000 years ago. So about the time of Christ. Now the bowl over its head is interesting. Does it show a slave or not? Well, let's show you the next ones. Here is a representation
Big.
of a white man in white alabaster with also holding a bowl.
Yeah.
Now, is this a slave? No, it isn't. We understand that this is not really a human being. This is a representation of the force holding up the bowl of the heavens,
That's right.
holding up the bowl of the sky.
The man with the water pot.
Then it goes back to the concept of Atlas. The old Greek legend of Atlas is that he held up a ball or a bowl of the heavens. You know, you've often seen Aztec holding up a ball. He's not holding up the earth. That is a mistake. He's holding up the zodiac. He's holding up the sky. So the bowl of the heavens from Babylon, and then the bowl of the heavens from Mexico.
What material is that made out of?
Obsidian, black obsidian.
It is gorgeous. Obsidian is terribly difficult to carve because they use them for arrowheads.
They use them for arrowheads.
And if you hit it the wrong way, it just totally
It'll fracture. To give you an idea of how superb this is made,
So this is exclusive.
the slightest mistake on it would shatter it.
Exactly. It's just exclusive.
How well made the mouth is. So now, that concept we see, it's not someone that was servile, it was someone that was obviously in a holy position. The supporter of the heavens. Now, how is all this possible? Here we have something very natural. These are the currents that have been at work
Yes.
many, many thousand years. So that if someone that left in a boat from North Africa, all they would have to do is click on something called the Canary Current, named after the Canary Islands, which are out here. And you follow straight across, and this will take you right into the Americas. And then when you want to go back, you just follow the Gulf Stream and take you right on out again like that. Now, most archaeologists today, they say this is a lot of nonsense. They said, most archaeologists say, oh, ancient people in those days, they didn't have to get over here. They were too afraid of the ocean. They only would go out on boats to do fishing and so on, you know. What that means is that the archaeologists are too afraid to go out in the ocean, is what they're saying here. You know, it's not the ancient people. The archaeologists will only get into a little boat. They're not going to go out. But can you imagine a people that lived in that kind of hard warfare in those days, or people that made the Great Pyramids, that they'd be too stupid or too cowardly to get into a boat to come over here? I don't agree with that. Now, here's an idea, you know, of the type of ships that are still being made. These are small boats. These are reed boats that are made in Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. Thor Heyerdahl, about 15 years ago, more than that, 20 years ago, it took a boat very similar to this, made the same essential construction, and sailed from North Africa directly into Veracruz in the Gulf of Mexico.
It'd be interesting to know that those ships are killing them.
They can't even be sunk. Now, so the archaeologists say, oh, okay, you've got a theory, but do you have any proof at all? There's no proof of any of this. Well, here's a stone that was found at the bottom of a lake, believe it or not, in Wisconsin. Now, it's unusual because it was found in what appeared to be the remains of a building underwater, about 20 feet underwater. So it had been there a long time. All the stones connected with this building were round. This one was wedge-shaped. You will see, very basically out here, the outlines of a ship. Now, this is a wedge-shaped stone that was indented, first of all. Here you see part of the bow, and here's the sail. And I'll show you a better example of it. This is a cylinder seal. This is a cylinder seal. It comes from ancient Syria. It's dated to about 900 BC. And it shows basically the hull, and it shows the type of sail they used, and it shows also the type of figureheads. Now keep that image in mind while I show you that same stone under a different light. See? There it is. There's the sail. It's the same thing. So someone had carved this. It's not a fake because it was found, like I said, underneath the water.
Under the water.
I'm sorry, excuse me. This is part of the type of technology used to bring these ancient people across the sea. Now the Egyptians, they talked about also a great flood, and this is part of their temple artwork, which shows the gods and the early human beings leaving this island, which they called Alalu, or the Isle of Reeds, the Island of Reeds. Now that's interesting because over here, the Aztecs spoke about their ancestors coming from a place called Aztlan. And Aztlan means place of reeds, exactly the same thing. And there is Aztlan. This is the Mexican story of their migration. They came from a great island, a great volcanic island in the sea. This represents Mexico, and this is the glyph meaning one, or a beginning. Everything starts. The Aztecs also had something known as a calendar stone. This calendar stone, excuse me, is not just a calendar to tell what month it is or what day it is. This was built on the cycles of time. It said that before our age, where we are now, there were 4 previous ages. And in these ages, human beings achieved great things. They had happy societies and they thought they were it. Until they began to stray from the laws of nature. And when they did that, their societies declined. And whenever the societies declined for a long period of time, the earth always rebelled. Something happened, so they said. Now, in the earliest times, the earliest fall of man was because of animals. They got out of harmony with animals, and the animals destroyed most men. And then God took pity on the few survivors, says, okay, I'll give you a chance again, and they start all over again. And then other things came along, wind, hurricane. But interestingly enough, these are the Aztecs now. These are not the American Indians or the Greeks. They said that the last big destruction was by a great deluge, huge flood, destroyed everything. That's the land. Because those people also were virtuous but lost it because they got greedy. I'll show you a close-up of that. Show you what that represents. This is a close-up of the last age, according to the Aztecs. And it shows you here a pyramid. You're looking down on the pyramid. This is like you're looking from the sky, from God's point of view. Looking down on a pyramid. And here you see a bucket overturned with water coming out of it, see? So it's the same, you've got the same theme repeated over and over again. And now this calendar stone is a very remarkable device. It still works. For example, this calendar stone told the Aztecs exactly when they would be conquered. They told them the exact year when they would be overcome by Cortez. Modern Indians in Mexico and in the Southwest use this stone today, images of it, to say when the next destruction will come. The next destruction is supposed to come in the early part of the next century. Now, it doesn't mean it will come, but if society continues to go along the way it goes now, it will. We still have time to but if society continues to decline, like all these other previous times, then we will also be rebelled against by the earth.
You got to take it over.
That's right. And when you consider, for example, all the ecological disasters in the making, how the earth has been sinned against and all the warnings that we're getting from science.
Amen.
This does not sound all that superstitious.
Frank,
Yeah.
you're talking about traveling by boat. Do you realize that those people thousands of years ago traveled by air?
That's a whole different, I think it's another lecture.
So you're aware of
Yeah, I am, but I can't keep these people that long. That sounds like a lecture you should give. Now, this is just a story, a recreation again of the flood, and this is how the people that built that stone envisioned the last destruction. Now, yes. Okay. This goes back basically to the time of Atlantis again, about 1200 BC. This area goes back to about 3000 BC, 3000 before Christ. Then these are, I explained basically how this stone works. It's a sophisticated, complex computer. Whoever made this or put this together represented a genius of an extremely high mathematical level. And I do not pretend to understand it all. I've read as much as I can about it, but it takes someone of a far greater mathematical comprehension than myself to understand. Basically, let me explain this. This is not a stone that you pick up and hold. This is a kind of a bowl. These are different, how do I put it, plates, which you can turn and shift, and they will line up so you can compute things. See? You can turn this, this section, the outer section, they all are like concentric rings. They turn, so you can calculate how far back you can go. Maybe millions of years. Maybe millions of years. I know this goes back to 3000 BC. I don't know how far back that goes.
Okay, there's an old saying that every 25,000 years, the wise scientists get together to compute the history for the next 25,000 years. It's what they use to compute it with.
I don't know, but I'm not a wise man. I can't tell you. This is a recreation. This is what the original looked like, okay? Now, the original was a fabulous, terrible thing. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. In the center here, you see this representation of the sun. He has his tongue sticking out. He has human hearts on his tongue. His two talons are grasping human hearts. These people, the Aztecs, they worshipped the god of time, the supreme god, because what does time do? Time brings everything together, time destroys everything, and time brings it back. Now this is the representation of time in his awful aspect, because look at what he's surrounded by. He's surrounded by these destructions that wiped out human beings, wiped out humanity. The Great Flood, some other disaster that goes all the way back thousands or millions of years. So what this is saying, watch out. He's saying, look out. Get your society together or else you're going to go down. So that's why he's represented like that. Get your house in order, right. Oh, I'm sorry, the original. Okay, the original, this is a reproduction. The original is in the, what they call the Archaeological Museum in Mexico City. It is a stone that is about 12 feet high. It weighs 21 tons. It was placed in a great cradle. And this cradle was at the top of a pyramid in Teotihuacan. I'm sorry, Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan was the great empire capital of the Aztecs. Now, when the Spaniards came in, they saw this, and they thought these people were worshiping the devil. So they did not understand the concept of time. So the Spaniards came in, they ripped it out of its cradle, and they sent it careening down the stairs of the pyramid. It got all chipped up and banged up. And then they buried it. Well, when modern Mexico City was being made, the construction engineers found this. They excavated it, and it is now in the museum. Archaeologists over time were able to find traces of paint and were able to reconstruct the lost parts. So I didn't want to show you the one that's in the museum today because it just looks like a wreck, and you can understand it. But this highlights all of those details that I was telling you about. This is what it looked like. It was a beautiful, terrible thing. It overhung the whole city. And so that the Aztecs would go by every day, and the people that lived in Tenochtitlan, they would see, we have got to act harmonious or else That's the only way we can avoid coming disasters.
Well, that looked like that stargates that
Thank you.
that when they were trying to figure out
Exactly.
the stargates. That
It'll be Stargate.
Yes.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, it's based on astral technology.
Yes.
It is go.
Okay.
Well.
Okay. Let me see. I'm almost finished here. Now,
Take your time.
this is a representation.
Take your time.
This was a representation that was found in Guatemala.
Yeah.
I visited a place called Tikal, which is a jungle city.
Tikal spoke with Washitaw, and Washitaw spoke with Tikal. They're the same you have now as your Washington-Turner.
Go ahead.
Right, she knows.
She knows, that's it.
But on the side of this building called the Acropolis, that's what archaeologists call it, next to the pyramid, not on the pyramid, there was a frieze, a stone representation along the roof. And this is one of the representations. It shows a man in a boat rowing away, or somebody drowning in the water, and in the background is a volcano exploding, see? And here's a representation of a building falling into the sea. So here's the same story. We're finding North America, ancient Greece, Mexico, now we're down to Guatemala. All these ancient, free European traditions are
Yeah.
talking about a major, big disaster from this previous society that came to the New World.
They call it volcano.
Well, we have no idea what they refer to this as, because this comes from the early Mayas, and very little of their translatable material is available until very recently. Actually, now they've broken a lot of the Maya hieroglyphs. So maybe we will find out the name of what that volcano was. The Aztecs referred to it as Aztlan.
Greeks,
Atlantis.
Romans,
Atlantis also.
we call it Vulcan.
Vulcan? Yeah, the Romans would call it Vulcan also. Yeah, that's another word. Now, this is just a sort of an idealized representation of what this previous homeland looked like. It was very mountainous. It's a place of great splendor and wealth. These are the canals that would service all parts of the island.
Yes.
Now, where do we think that this land of Atlantis was? Here is Spain, Portugal, Gibraltar, Morocco, North Africa, the Canary Islands, Madeira, the Azores. It appears, from what Plato tells us, Atlantis was this large island just outside the Straits of Gibraltar. He referred to them as the Pillars of Hercules in those days. That's this area. So it would be in this area. Well, what do we find? This is what, if you're in a satellite today or a space shuttle, you look down, this is what it looks like. But what does it look like under the water? Is there anything under there?
Isn't that a common Egyptian? I mean, that profile, that picture there?
Yeah, it looks almost like it. Well, here's that same area of ocean. This is a map now, of course. This is underwater. This is a very recent map that was released by Scripps Howard Oceanographer Society about 2 years ago. It shows really what's at the bottom of the ocean. This has only been learned through space satellite technology. Here we see the Canary Islands. Here's North Africa. Here's Portugal and Spain. And right over here, we find something called Mount Ampere. That's a name that's given to it by geologists and oceanographers. And it is a large sunken island. Now, when a ship called the Glomar Challenger went out to this area to investigate it, they found that, in fact, it is a large volcano which sank, collapsed into the ocean within the last 10,000 years. So most likely, this is the real Atlantis. This is the homeland of mankind.
Yeah.
Now, this is a drawing that's based on Plato's description of Atlantis. Concentric circles. You see here is the central Holy of Holies, main temple. These are the water courses and land courses that would connect all parts of the island. This is as it's shown as it's being built. This would be sort of an idealized representation of the center of Atlantis. To give you an idea again what it was like. On the land were all the great temples, all the magnificent buildings. Here was the great administrative center and the temple of Poseidon, where also the sun and the sea were worshipped. Again, sacred harmony, 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Now, It was, of course, struck by a major volcanic event. That area of the ocean that I showed you is very seismically active. In its last days, Atlantis is being overwhelmed by this volcanic activity. How possibly did it sink? We think we understand the mechanism. This would be the people evacuating the city as it's being tormented by the volcanic eruption. And here is a representation of the great city tragically being overwhelmed by walls of water. Now we think, how did this happen? How could just a volcanic eruption actually sink an island? Well, imagine when Mount St. Helens exploded. Now, what happened? Remember 1980, Mount St. Helens exploded in Washington, the state of Washington. And it didn't blow straight up, did it? It blew out the side. So if Mount St. Helens had been an island and surrounded by water and would have blown out the side, the water would have rushed in to something called the magma chamber. That would have then caused something called subduction. It would have literally grabbed or pulled the entire island underwater. And that's basically what probably happened there.
All right.
So in its last days, there would be nothing left but this great cataclysm from which a few people survived.
Yes, Lord.
Now here we are in Poverty Point. This is a recreation of one of the mounds there that was found. Now here is an aerial photograph, one of the earliest aerial photographs of Poverty Point. And it shows again the same setup that you see in Atlantis. You have the alternating rings of land and water. These indentations were found all to be water channels. This is overgrown area. At first it was thought this is only the city itself. But subsequent investigation with infrared photography has shown that these rings extend all around, so that this river really cut through it. And at the very center was their temple, their Holy of Holies also. The same as described by Plato. Here is a cutaway, an archaeologist's cutaway of Poverty Point. You see to better advantage. Now what's interesting, this mound is an artificial mound that was also built by the ancient people here. And it is just due north of Poverty Point. You go visit that today. Interestingly enough, Plato said that the city of Atlantis lay just due south of a great sacred mountain. So here we see here the attempts by these people here to recreate their sacred mountain.
Right.
Here's again an idea. This is a drawing of Plato's description of Atlantis, same circular configuration as you see in Poverty Point. This is taken of a model that's at the museum. Here's another example again of Atlantis as a concentric design. By the way, this is an extremely unusual design. You do not see cities laid out like this anywhere. They're usually laid out on a grid system. So to find something like this occurring in two different parts of the world surely indicates a connection of some kind. This again, to go back, here we are Atlantis, here we are Poverty Point. And again, keep in mind that the dates also coincide. Poverty Point is built 1200 BC. Atlantis is destroyed 1200 BC.
Sorry, Frank, you're saying
Yeah.
that Atlantis was the patriarch civilization. What about Mu?
That's, again, these are really huge topics to get into. I would kind of have to divert from them. But Mu is another one to get into. So then if you're from a distance, this is what it would have looked like. Whoop, am I going the right way here? Oh, I'm sorry here. So this is just the gift of the past that I think is being shared with all of us, and I really sincerely appreciate your efforts to do this honoring of the past. It's really the important thing. And if you'd like to help us out, the best way is to subscribe to our magazine and tell your friends about it. And we're trying to carry on these ideas. Nobody else that I know of is dedicated to these same principles of bringing out the past. So that's why I really appreciate the chance to be able to speak with you today, and thank you very much for your attention.
Machu Picchu.